All right, so I'll go ahead and kick things off. Thanks everyone for joining and for taking the time to meet with us today. My name is Brittany Worthy and I am the partner manager supporting the relationship between Cloudreach and Google Cloud here at Cloudreach. And for those who may not be familiar with Cloudreach, we're a Blackstone portfolio company. We're born in the cloud. And we are a services company that helps tackle challenges throughout many different areas, from cloud strategy adoption, cloud migration, application innovation, data insights, and security, which is what we're going to talk about today. When it comes to our partnership with Google Cloud, we've been a premier partner since 2010. We hold specializations in cloud migration, infrastructure, data analytics, and security. And we also have won Security Partner of the Year for the third year in a row this year. So we're really excited to meet with you guys today. And I will pass it over to our MC who will be hosting today. He's a board member of Cloudreach. He is the advisor to our CEO, and he is also our chief technologist, Peter Richards.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this fireside chat. It's something that we thought might be useful for those who have not really yet leapt into Google Cloud. So we were talking about some of the things which might prevent folk from being taking advantage of Google Cloud. And certainly from my perspective, the two things that I would have been nervous about in some of my old roles, I think, Brittany, can you move the slide forward? Because, well, there we go. So that's the agenda. We're actually going to talk through security and third-party data, and then some of the opportunities that you can take once you have those things in place. So if you could leap to the next slide, we'll get through this relatively quickly. We're going to have Phil Venables, who is the CISO for Google Cloud, talk to us about how to be secure within Google's cloud offering. And we also have Rakesh, who is the global product manager at Refinitiv, which is now part of the London Stock Exchange Group, but has one of the largest sets of third-party data that is used in financial services in the world. And so is a great person to talk to us about how you're able to take advantage of that third-party data. So, why have we got these two people here? Well, principally because in order to take advantage of the great functionality that you get by using GCP, flexibility, great analytics, etc., you have to be comfortable that your data, your process is going to be secure. And there are several things which are different between data center and cloud in order to make that security work. And you also need to be able to get access to the third-party data to drive your models. And so very much what we're trying to do is provide you with the direction as to how you can make and extend your security process and models into public cloud, and also how you can get access to third-party data. Because without those two things, then not much moves forward. So that's the aim behind today. Phil and Rakesh are going to spend 5-10 minutes talking about their area and how they see things work. And then we're going to throw it open to questions. And so hopefully you're all comfortable raising your hands and asking questions, because the forum should be somewhat conversational. And you should leave today's 45 minutes, 50 minutes worth of chat with a level of comfort that you are able to relatively easily create a secure environment for your activities in public cloud. And it is frankly, much easier to find the third-party data than if you're doing it in your data center. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to Phil, who has been with Google, I think, rather about a year. But prior to that, he was the CISO for Goldman for 20 odd years and led an awful lot of the financial services thinking on security. So I can't think of a better person to talk about how to secure public cloud than Mr. Venables. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to Phil.
Great. So yeah, I'll just, as Peter says, I'll just talk for a few minutes, and I think hand over to Rakesh, and then we'll kind of have a broader conversation and a broader dialogue. So as Peter says, I've spent most of my career on the buy side of the cloud fence, buying and integrating multiple different cloud services, including Google Cloud. So if it's any testimony to Google Cloud that having worked with all three clouds, I chose to come to Google Cloud, that probably gives some kudos to Google. My role here at Cloud, and actually interestingly Workspace and some of our other enterprise businesses as well, is to look after risk, security, compliance, and privacy. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how all of those things interplay carefully with each other. But specifically on the subject of security, there's two main things I want to go down the path of. First of all is the difference between on-premise and cloud security, and then the second part is to talk about something we call the transition from shared responsibility to shared fate, and what does that mean for customers. So the first thing on the difference between kind of on-premise and cloud security, and I would suspect a lot of you have either navigated this or in the process of navigating this, is that first of all, it's different, but is largely better. And the reason we think about it this way is if you go back to security first principles that include things like least privilege, the use of zero trust principles, in other words, making no implicit assumption about the security of anything, constantly verifying the authenticity, the integrity of endpoints, strongly authenticating people, making sure that software is constructed and delivered in a managed pipeline, and making sure that the container or other runtime only executes software that comes out of that secured pipeline according to however the artifacts are signed, all the way through to making sure that there's not just least privilege in the context of access roles, but also least privilege into what endpoints and services can talk to each other, plus an overlay of fundamental continuous monitoring of not just the traffic flows and process communications and other activities, but also making sure that the environment is configured in a highly declarative way, such that you're specifying the configuration, and then you can continuously monitor that configuration as conforming to what you expect. The additional thing as well in the cloud versus on-premise is there's multiple different layers of control that often appear in some organizations, but very rarely appear consistently in all organizations. And this is making sure that security control is defined at a per instance level through an identity and access management layer, all the way through to grouping clusters of machines and logical machines and processes and containers into managed entities for which the security policy can be enforced. And then also with things like Google Cloud, especially where we think we've made some of the wiser choices in terms of the overall structure, being able to enforce policies across whole clusters of projects and folders and organization structures, rather than necessarily doing it at an individual account level. So the bottom line is across particularly Google Cloud is you're able to take and implement a series of first principle security objectives natively in the cloud, whereas historically on-premise, that was something that required a lot more effort. And one of the things we encourage all customers as they move from on-premise to the cloud is not necessarily seek to replicate their on-premise security model, but to potentially re-architect and reimagine that, because you get significantly more capabilities. And then, as I'll talk about in a second, you've got also increased opportunity to manage things with a more secure by default approach as well. So in essence, the cloud has baked in a lot more security capability at multiple layers that tend to complement each other more than has traditionally been available in an on-premise environment. Part two of what I'd like to talk about as well is, as I mentioned, this transition from a shared responsibility to a shared fate model. Now, again, you'll all be familiar with the notion of shared responsibility, that the cloud provider runs security of the cloud infrastructure and the customer's responsible for configuring themselves securely running on the cloud. Now, we've all been on the receiving end of the conversations around what it means around shared responsibility. But one of the things a while ago, we decided that it really wasn't enough to think about that shared responsibility model, that what we wanted to do was think about how we had shared fate with our customers and really reach across that line of shared responsibility to make sure that we were making different and better decisions to proactively engage with customers to ensure that they were building things more securely in the cloud. And that includes everything from better and better choices on secure defaults, things like how we encrypt storage by default, how we set up many other security options by default. I wouldn't say we're perfect in everything, but we're progressively working across many of our products and features and looking at those default choices so that we ship with full safeties on, so that customers don't always have to reconfigure things to make them more secure. Then similarly, we spend a lot of effort building security blueprints and what we call landing zones to get customers up and running quickly with specific design options, again, pre-configured in secure ways, with a highly opinionated view from Google about how we would actually configure the security. Ultimately, they're all obviously configurable, but we want to make sure that we're shipping with more arrangements of products in higher, in more secure ways. And then also the final thing in this kind of moving beyond this line of shared responsibility to shared fate is to really look at the policy setting in different layers of the stack. So in other words, if a customer wants to set a security policy in a data product or a container product, then they shouldn't also have to keep going down the stack to set the equivalent policies at the network or infrastructure layer to support that. That should all happen automatically. And again, we're progressively working through all the product range to make sure that we're progressing in that direction. And then finally, it's also adding more advanced security features pervasively across the products over time so that customers can take advantage of not just things like encryption of storage and encryption of data in transit, but increasingly things like confidential computing, where you're encrypting data to the point of computation, and then also being able to take advantage of managing cryptographic keys that support all of those cryptographic services. So again, that customers have the ultimate control over who has access to that data and get access transparency around all of the different activities that are going on. So really, as I just kind of recap, is it's all about making sure that we are providing a whole range of security services by default as much as possible, and then reimagining how to do security in the cloud in a much more easier way, driven by first principles and zero trust, as well as us supporting more and more capabilities to deliver that default level of security across all of the products. So that's probably enough for now, and I'm not sure if I'm handing back to Peter or directly over to Rakesh.
I think I can take it from here, Phil, and it's a good segue as well. Thank you for having me, Cloudreach, and I'm happy to be here. I've been in Refinitiv LSEC for the last 14 years. Over the last 3 years, I've been managing big data products, which is stick history and time series offering. And to continue with the parallel that Phil drew between on-prem and cloud, I think if you walk through a journey of a big data user, right, be it a user from the buy side, sell side, or a middle office use case, risk analytics, transaction cost analytics, etc., you're going to have users who do things traditional way, which is do it on-prem, or you're going to have users who are slowly migrating their applications to cloud, right? And if you talk about the traditional way of doing things, you usually have to stand up a big data infrastructure, which is you need to procure hardware, you need to install it, configure it, test it out, and then you're going to have a set of servers which are going to be ready to carry out your business operations. And all of that requires upfront planning, which takes, depending on how you plan your resources, etc. It takes months of time before you have, the applications ready for your utilization. And then you're going to have months and months of time and resources and an army of engineers which are involved in data management and data preparation essentially. So Refinitiv carried out a study a couple of years ago, and it was pretty much highlighting some of these challenges faced by customers or users across the stream, which is for every dollar that is spent by firms in financial market data, an additional $8 is spent on processing, preparation, and storage of data. So we're talking about an additional $8 which is spent on just making data ready before it is utilized for whatever your use case is. And we all know that data in itself is of paramount importance. It is the insights, it is the signals, it is the analytics that is residing in the data, which is of paramount importance. And similarly, we had a very popular study with Gartner carrying out studies centered around the data scientist, where a data scientist typically spends 80% of his or her time in data preparation, and only 20% of time is spent on data analytics and observation and experimentation and modeling, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this means that traditionally, the way we've managed data, we have introduced a lot of inefficiencies, and it's largely a reflection of the technology that existed back in time, which continues to exist to a decent extent. But what Google Cloud specifically provides as an opportunity is all the benefits that we all know, which is provided by regular cloud service providers. But with our case, where we are providing petabytes of data to our customers, with our data sitting in cloud, we are effectively providing a fully managed service to our users, right? So a customer does not have to stand up a big data infrastructure from ground up. They do not have to maintain an ETL infrastructure. They do not have to have an army of people who are constantly, carrying out a wheel of activities, which is traditionally the case around monitoring your infrastructure, around provisioning, servers, et cetera, et cetera. With a fully managed service, if I'm, let's say, a new boutique fund or a spin-off of a hedge fund, or for that matter, even a large hedge fund or a private equity firm, et cetera, with access to data from a fully managed service, I can run analytics on the fly, right? From day one, I can start drawing insights from the data. I'm going to be fully rid of, to a great extent, rid of the massive months of time that is lost in data preparation and data mining, etc. And which means that the simplicity of me carrying out my operations is going to be true to a great extent. The total cost of ownership of data is going to be drastically reduced because I do not have to manage the data. It is managed by a data vendor like Refinitiv or any other service provider that is providing the data on cloud. And the infrastructure is obviously managed by Google, where you can run, you can run queries to the extent of terabytes, etc. And you can draw analytics in a matter of few seconds. So I am essentially having the service provided by Google as well as from a data vendor that allows me to carry whatever I do best, which is as a hedge fund, I'm going to be in my search of alpha. As a risk analyst firms, I want to be, measuring my level of risk, etc. So from day one, I can start interacting with the data without having to go manage those overheads around data management and standing up a data infrastructure. I think flexibility, total cost of ownership, the simplicity of interacting with the data, and also the total cost of ownership, which I mentioned before, but the speed to analytics, right? which is drawing insights from day one. These are some of the benefits that I get from day one, regardless of the size of the firm that I'm operating in. And even if I am one of those firms which has already a big data infrastructure, which can interact with petabytes of data, etc., with the kind of data explosion that we are witnessing in the market, financial markets these days, I think it's just a matter of time before all of that, starts boiling down. So if I outsource some of these responsibilities to cloud service provider like Google, and have a data vendor like Refinitiv manage the data on your behalf, then it pretty much rids me of all the overhead around the challenges with interacting with data.
Gentlemen, thank you for that introduction. What I come out of hearing both of you is, it's better in cloud. It's it's quicker to action, if you like, in cloud. But I guess the question for both of you is, what prevents people from taking advantage of that? So, Phil, you described very well how you should think about security, and it sort of all makes sense. But I know that certainly the first reaction I had was, well, who do I go and find to do that and to make sure that we're thinking holistically, because that's not something that traditionally we've done. And Rakesh, sort of from your perspective, it's almost the, well, again, who do I go and talk to in order to get that process working? Because, it sounds fantastic that I don't have to have all of this infrastructure stuff done. So I guess my question is, what's inhibiting the move to public cloud? Why do people still need to be encouraged? So Phil, where do you come out on that?
Yeah, so I think there's still, for some organizations, and this is changing quite a bit, there's still a degree of people thinking about cloud is a risk that they need to manage. And I think what we're starting to see is people start to realize, because of the often higher levels of security and resilience you get from the cloud, people are starting to see now cloud is actually a means of managing their security and resilience. But in many organizations, there's still a little bit of reluctance. And I think, historically that may be fair, because everybody's read all of the stories around kind of open storage buckets being left out there and cloud being misconfigured. It's caused an exposure of different data sets and other services. And so, this is why we tend to think of this as, it's not just important to have defense in depth from attacks, but also defense in depth against configuration errors, which has driven us to take this more secure by default stance. So I think there is a little bit of pent-up nervousness, and maybe not, if not on the IT teams, maybe a little bit still in the security teams, and if not the security teams, maybe the legal, the compliance, the audit teams. So I think there's still some of that to work through, and certainly partnering with with organizations like Cloudreach and partnering directly with us, we have a lot more people now and a lot more documentation that can help people overcome that nervousness and actually just take advantage of the capabilities and find that they get more they get more security and resilience from it. But I think one of the other real, less perceptual things is just the transition from on-premise to the cloud that rarely happens in a very clean way. There's often a bringing something up in the cloud that has to connect back to on-premise or has to connect across multiple services, and again, that can be challenging, and there's various ways of dealing with that. And one of the things that we're working a lot on is blueprints and application modernization templates and migration templates that help people not just build brand new in the cloud, but deal with that hybrid environment, either that's going to stay hybrid or that's hybrid in transition. And again, that's more complicated than building brand new in the cloud, but it's certainly manageable. And I think not just us, but to be fair, all the cloud providers are spending more time on this, because most customers now are not building new in the cloud. They're migrating workloads to the cloud, having done as much as they can to build new in the cloud.
I'm interesting you say that. We at Cloudreach, we see exactly the same thing. So, an awful lot of work on blueprints, on understanding how to split the workload. But one of the things that you mentioned initially was, or you mentioned that all the configuration becomes deterministic rather than you mentioned deterministic configuration. It isn't clear to me that many people have really embraced that in the on-premise situation. And so is that one of the things that causes people to sort of stumble a little?
Yeah, that can often be a challenge because in many, to be fair, there's a lot of environments that have gone down that path of, infrastructure as code, controls as code, and are specifying things. But again, it's not always pervasive in the on-premise environment. One of the, and so I think part of that, customers in moving to the cloud and dealing with their existing infrastructure have got to figure out how to think about that kind of configuration and infrastructure as code approach on-premise and in the cloud, not just in the cloud. But again, there's ways of doing that, and I think again a lot of cloud providers now, I mean, we do this with our Anthos and other platforms, are capable of deploying on-premise in a way that helps the migration, that then provides the foothold to then facilitate a faster migration to the cloud. And a lot of that is part of the modeling and specification of the configuration. And then once you've built up that level of declarative configuration, it's then easy to kind of extend that and replicate that and use that as a pattern to stand up more infrastructure. So
the move to the cloud is improving everything, right? So a rising tide floats all boats. So are you seeing the same thing, Rakesh, in that, certainly the way that data seems accessible in the cloud from Refinitiv, is that something which you're looking to sort of push back into on-premise distribution as well? Or is there really this very big differential between the two?
The feedback that we constantly get from our users, Peter, is that they want to have access to all kinds of data on cloud, right? But the challenge here is when customers talk about data, their definition of data is pretty broad. So they're talking about pricing data, they're talking about referential data, you're talking about new sentiment analytics, you're talking about events data, etc. So, and obviously there are going to be providers of these disparate data sets. Now the latest fad is the alternative data, right? So you're going to have multiple sources that are going to be feeding into end users' application. So us as in Refinitiv, we obviously have broad set of data sets on offer, and our journey is towards cloud. And this is something that we had defined a couple of years ago itself, because we were the ones who were closest to the kind of data that we were aggregating from venues and brokers and other data providers globally, right? So we had real insights around the landscape that we see in the financial markets, where everything is driven by engines, as we all know it, and that has resulted in an explosion of messages, tick data messages, etc. So we were very clear on about that. For us to continue to serve our customers and ensure that everything that is happening in the market is made available to our customers in a time-friendly, in a reliable, in a resilient fashion, etc., we had to move to cloud. And that's the journey we've taken with our biggest data, which is tick history, which is multi-petabytes database with data going back all the way to 1996, intraday content. We've made that available in Google Cloud. So instead of sending to our customers on a daily basis flat files of data collected from various exchanges, as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, we're providing effectively a managed service to our customers, where if they have, if they are trading on exchanges which are spread across the globe, they are guaranteed to receive the data a few hours after the market close in GCP, and they can run their analytics on the fly, right? And that is something that is being replicated across our businesses, where customers are expecting us not just to provide resting data on cloud, but also provide streaming data in cloud without conflating any text. So every single bit, every single ask, even from the full order book, which is what we call level 3 data, it is an expectation from our customers that we provide all of that in cloud. And some of the challenges with cloud delivery, when you talk about streaming, high frequency data is around latencies. And I would be very interested to hear from Phil what his thoughts are around addressing this concern amongst our users, where they believe that if it is cloud delivery, then it's going to be it's not going to be a low latency form of delivering real-time streaming data.
Actually, that's an interesting point. I mean, the risk of kind of making this too much of a Google pitch is, not all clouds are created equal in terms of network latency. And I think, one of the things I think is reasonably well, recognized and commented on quite a lot by industry analysts is that the underlying software-defined network fabric and the network architecture that underpins, Google Cloud has somewhat more predictability and low latency than some of the other service providers. But I think that's been kind of independently commented on, and we know that that's important, and making sure that that's another thing that can be declaratively defined and deployments positioned according to that and other criteria, as you point out, are going to continue to be important.
Do you actually see any security issues in permitting third-party data into customers' environments? I mean, I presume this has all been worked out, but is it something that customers should worry about, should take into account, or it just happens very naturally?
Well, I think generally, I mean, there's no straightforward answer to any, to any kind of issue of moving data around. I mean, I think we have some pretty well established secure patterns of how customers can provide access to ingest data and how data can be shared and how data pipelines can be set up across customers in many different ways. And so I think that that's reasonably well established. But like with anything, when you're thinking about identity and access and security around data, there's still a lot of situation specific issues that need to be thought about, such as the level of access, whether that access is going to be permanently granted, how you log what's been transferred. But generally speaking, again, I mean, I think, in this audience, probably more than most will understand this, that when you think about data movement, it's not just security, it's also compliance issues, licensing issues, a whole array of things. And when you're thinking about data movement, you've got to think about all of the control aspects of it, not just the very specific security piece. And again, that can get more complex. And one of the things I think we and other cloud providers are looking at is how do you bake those aspects into the default approaches to managing data sharing as well. So it's not just the security pieces, it's some of the other control aspects as well.
Right, and our experience of granting access to the various data sets that we have on Google has been pretty much what Phil has mentioned. It is respectful of clients' licenses and the agreement that they have with us as a data vendor, with the suppliers of data, third-party data providers, etc. I think one of the, again, I would say it's one of the misguided fears of cloud is a lot of users believe that either their data vendors or the cloud service provider gets an insight into the kind of analytics that they run, in the kind of tickers that they are looking and analyzing, etc., because they believe that whatever they do with the data is their secret sauce, and they want to keep it very, very tight and regulated within their firms itself, and they do not want to have any external users to have access to the kind of intelligence that they're drawing from the data, which I believe is slightly misguided, because us as data vendors obviously do not get any side of what users get to do with the data, which we can't access to our end users. And I believe, Phil, even from Google as an infrastructure standpoint, there is no monitoring, or rather getting into a cloud individual client's instance and analyzing or having a sight of what exactly they're doing, correct?
Right. No, that's right. And in fact, we often say, a phrase we often use is you shouldn't have to trust us, and so you get to trust us because you shouldn't have to trust us with the access. Now, for example, this is why we provide things like access transparency logs, so you can consume actual records of where there's ever been any legitimate support activity that you've requested on your account. You can consume the access transparency logs that stands behind what access occurred that you authorized as a customer. And then similarly with a lot of our more advanced encryption controls, where you, if you chose, can have absolute control over the cryptographic keys using a technique called external key manager. And again, if there's a legitimate support activity that you've requested, then you have to be contacted to then give up the encryption key for that particular activity. And again, that's another way of getting constant control over these things, so that you're actually, you have the ability to not just trust us, but absolutely be able to get to verify that as well. The other thing as well is and I think we've talked about this a lot in various forums, is we do not routinely monitor anything. Everything is absolutely isolated, and that's just a core principle of how we operate. And then similarly, that's not even done in aggregate across customer projects. So this is where we provide tooling for monitoring for customers to use, but we don't use them ourselves on particular customer projects. So that's that's core to how we operate. And that's not actually just for security, that's for privacy, for compliance reasons. We're subject to hundreds of different compliance certifications that vet and review that as well. So that's something that's very much core to what we do. And ultimately, the reason we're pursuing all of these things like confidential computing and external key management is so that even with all of that, there's a degree of control for customers to manage the encryption keys, so that that you don't have to trust us to do that. That's just absolutely controlled anyway.
It sounds like the right thing to do is clearly move into Google Cloud, but I'd like to throw it open to see if there are any questions from the attendees. I mean, if they're not, then I'm sure we can think of a few other things to chat about. Are there any questions? Anybody out there? I think you have to pull yourself off mute in order to ask a question, or you can put it into the chat. It's up to you. So let me float a question. So Rakesh, if I were wanting to start a project, what's the sort of minimum footprint, if you like, that I could get from Refinitiv, right? Do I get pay by the drink, or is it pay by the tick, or how do I start that process? Because certainly on premise, I have to build the lines and get the landing zone, etc. Right? Is there a very very small outlay starter pack that I can start with and get comfortable in this process?
Yeah, great question, Peter. And the way we commercialize our data, it's by venue, right? So we collect data from over 500 sources. It includes exchanges, it includes brokers, it includes our own proprietary trading platforms, etc. So if I'm a user who's trading on, let's say, a matching platform, and I want to test my algorithm, matching platform is the FX trading platform owned by Refinitiv. And if I'm interested in backtesting my strategies using historical data for the matching platform, then I can just subscribe to the matching data, right? I just have to pay for the license for matching data. I have to have a Google ID, and it just takes a couple of minutes. I'm sure Phil can stand by this one, that it takes a couple of minutes for anyone to get a Google account. Yeah, you just have to bring your credit card and sign up, etc. And even as a beginner, you get some credits too, right, to play around with the data before you start paying for the data analysis or the compute. So with a fully managed environment, Refinitiv is going to own the storage. It's going to own the making the data available and the all the things around data management, etc. And at a predefined time, given that we're talking about a service which is historical in nature, which is a T+1 service, a few hours after the market close, you're going to be getting access to all the transactions that happen on the matching platform, right? And from day one, you're going to be getting access to the full breadth of the history that is held on a given venue. For matching, we have history going back to 2008. For a lot of venues, we have historical data going back to 1996. So from day one, I'm going to be getting access to the entire data set. I just have to sign a contract with Refinitiv, and obviously have an access to Google Cloud, and I can start, interacting with the data, running some simple SQL queries. Our data structure is pretty simplified, that we're going to have all the data arranged in rows and columns, and the data is normalized. So you don't have to, spend a lot of time trying to understand the nuances of our matching data platform versus any other data source provider. And this applies to data globally, right? That's one of the things that we always pride ourselves, that we provide data in a format which allows a user to consume the data in an, not so complex fashion, that the data is easy to consume. So it's simply a matter of buying the necessary license and having a Google account, and it's entirely up to me, the kind of analytics that I want to draw using some simple SQL statements.
Cool. I guess the same question to you, Phil, right? How do I start in a secure manner? Are there downloadable blueprints that allow me to take advantage of what Rakesh has just offered in a very straightforward, simple way without having to build the whole machinery of deterministic security posture? I mean,
yeah.
How do I start?
So you can start in very simple ways. In fact, just kind of spinning up some basic infrastructure, whether it's kind of Google Kubernetes engine, some of our Anthos platform, or even just some of the basic, infrastructure as a service capabilities, come out of the box reasonably well configured in secure ways, and then as you deploy extra components on top of those instantiate security policies that come with the products. But for more complex environments, for setting up a whole environment that's ready to take real workloads, we have a series of security blueprints that are more than just white papers with diagrams. They actually come with Terraform and cloud build code, but mainly Terraform, and so they're the secure configuration that we've built for a collection of products to stand up an environment, and that's enough with the Terraform code to actually just push that configuration and deploy it. And then we also have monitoring tools that let you monitor adherence to that configuration, or you can continue to customize and add to it. We're adding and developing these blueprints all the time, and as well, depending on the workload, we also have customer engineering and professional services teams that can help instantiate other blueprints that are even more specific to a particular customer's workload to get people up and running. And people are finding that effective, and we're going to continue adding to that set of blueprints over time for more complex use cases. And again, it'll all come with configuration code that people can use rather than just having to build their own from a set of architecture diagrams.
Yeah, that's very good. What I'd like to sort of take a slightly different question now, which is about migration, right? You mentioned, Phil and Rakesh, that you're seeing a lot of sort of applications now moving, which means that they're in a hybrid state for a while. But what's the approach if you're not just trying the cloud, if you're actually thinking of taking an application and doing migration? Now, there are key things that one should think about, especially when you're looking to move data sets between on-premise to in the cloud, when you're taking a security model which was on-premise and you want to now extend that into the cloud. Are there things that we need to take into account? And by the way, I'm also conscious of the time. We've got like 10 minutes left, so I don't want to disappear off the end of the hour without allowing Brittany to wrap everything up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start just real quick. I mean, I think the perhaps short but disappointing answer is it all depends. And for some simple use cases, it's just a matter of defining the VMs, creating a cloud instance of the database you're using and move things across. For other things, you probably want to think about re-architecting the application, not in a dramatic way, but sometimes it might be containerizing it, might be taking advantage of a new, more capable cloud database platform. In our case, things like Cloud Spanner or analytics platforms like BigQuery that you're not really able to get historic scale and capability on premise, and so that's something to take advantage of. But it really depends. But the good thing is, as I think I mentioned before, with cloud providers now, especially Google, there's a lot more migration and modernization tooling to help on that journey. There was a few years ago where customers were mostly on their own to re-architect to the cloud. Now there's a lot more tooling that makes that process much more gradual and manageable. Sorry, Rakesh, you were going to say something.
No, absolutely, Phil. And I was also going to say this pretty much the same thing. It entirely depends on the end user's use case. But what we've witnessed amongst a lot of firms, especially some of the large sell-side firms, is they are moving step by step, right? And the biggest challenges with data has been the volume and velocity, right? And now you have some challenges around variety of data where you have alternative data sets, etc. But a lot of our users are taking a pragmatic approach towards migration. So they are moving some of their workflows on cloud before moving the entire the data lake, so to say. And even if a lot of workflows have already been migrated to the cloud, depending on the kind of use cases that I have. So if I'm running some sensitive trading strategies, etc., I'm obviously going to be moving the small data, analyzing big data. So if you talk about the BigQuery application, you can analyze terabytes of data and draw simple VWAP analytics or some sort of simple moving averages and TWAPs, etc. So all these kind of analytics are pretty small in size when it comes to looking at every single trade execution, correct? So I also have an option of if I'm decided on continue to run my trading models within my data lake, then I can draw small data, analyzing big data on cloud, and load the small data into my local applications. And this pretty much the approach that we've seen from some of our users.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for that. I'm actually going to introduce my colleague Venkatesh, who will talk about how potentially Cloudreach could help in these areas if people are interested. But I have to say, thank you for the insights and the education, and let's see where it goes from here. So
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And this was really a fascinating and insightful conversation. And I should mention special thanks to Phil, because a lot of the security areas that you mentioned, we cover a lot of them as part of our workshops as well. As part of this event itself, we're offering a series of free workshops. And as I said, we cover a lot of the same concepts that you covered in terms of, the designing blueprints for landing zones, the zero trust security model, IAM security, the whole cloud native application security, right, in terms of network security, container security, data security. So these are the things that we actually cover as part of our workshops. And how this usually works is, we get engaged with either existing or potential new customers of GCP itself. We do have a discovery session as part of the workshop, and then we work alongside your teams through one of the 2 pilot programs that you see here, right? One of the first pilot program that we actually focus with all of our customers is on actually the landing zone, right? The governance and build and migration to the cloud itself. And the other one that we focus on is event threat detection one. Our overall goal here is actually to help you and strengthen your security posture. Same things as Phil discussed. Like we focus a lot on security first principles. We focus a lot on defense in depth, and also zero trust is something that we try to educate our customers. The fundamental goal of us having these workshops with our customers is actually to educate you on the Google's next generation security approach, and translate this whole engagement that we have with you into a more actionable roadmap. With my experience working with a lot of our GCP customers, we truly believe there's a lot of value. There's lots to gain from these workshops itself. So I truly believe, and I truly hope that actually we do get to hear from you today, so that that we can actually look forward to work with you as your trusted partner in your whole cloud journey, and so that in the end, we can deliver the promise of the cloud to you and to the other people in the industry. Thank you. Back to Brittany.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. We'll be sending a follow-up email. You can also reach us at gcp@cloudreach.com if you want to go ahead and schedule one of these workshops. But we will be sending out a follow-up email shortly. I really do appreciate all of your time, and thank you so much to our hosts and panelists today. We really appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
All right.